Okay, so welcome again, and thanks for joining us this afternoon for the first view of the Next Level 2020 survey. I was going to say good morning to our guests from America, but I got rudely awoken to the fact that it's actually Thanksgiving out there, so I know a lot of them are going to be watching this on record tomorrow, so for when they do watch this recording, welcome to you, and apologies for not thinking of your public holidays before we did this today. Joined today by Naeem Alvi. Naeem is the founder and managing director of Notepad Brand Strategy Agency. Got Naeem on the call today because I think it would be great to get some of his insights on some of these things that might come through here today. And also, I owe Naeem a big thank you for helping us put this all together. So thank you, Naeem, in advance, and I'm sure we'll hear from you as we go through the session. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you some highlights from the report. I'm not just going to read the report out to you. That will be coming out next week. But what we really want to try and do is share some of those insights with you, but also try and share some tips that will hopefully be useful and that we're only going to be able to do on this webinar. So hopefully there'll be some good things you can take away from this. And we are recording this, so you can always go back over it again as well. Okay, so kind of why are we doing this is probably the first question I wanted to answer for you. It's probably been it has been a bit of a long-term ambition of us to try and give something useful to business leaders that are trying to take the organizations to that next level, scale up, whatever that looks like for you. Something that can kind of give them a bit of I suppose, a headline view of kind of where are they at, how are they doing, how are they progressing. So actually the main purpose of doing this survey was not just to give a nice report that you can read, but actually to start to build a dashboard where you can sort of look at that dashboard and see kind of where are we at, how are we doing on the key factors that are going to enable us to take our organisation forward. So off the back of this report, there will be a dashboard for everyone that's done the report that you'll have access to next week. And what we're hoping that will do is give you some focus, ultimately give you some benchmarking. In this first instance this year, fairly limited based on what other people have said in the survey, but as we move in year on year, because this will be an annual report, you'll better start to benchmark yourself a bit more deeply against other businesses like yours, and start to sort of map your own progress as we go forward. So it's kind of a gift for us, but we want it not just for our clients, but also for just business leaders more generally around the world. Okay, so in terms of who completed the survey, all senior leaders from over 20 industry types in the end, so that will be broken down in the report for you. The scale of those businesses was everything from sort of less than 1 million up to 250 million plus, so a good range of businesses included in this survey. And as you'd expect then, everything from micro 0 to 9 employees up to large to 250 plus employees. And then the locations were global, but very much, I would have to be honest, slanted on the UK this year, which was kind of deliberate as it's year one. So about 75% of the audience came from the UK, but we've also got inputs from business leaders in the USA, Australia, Middle East, and Europe. So that just gives you a bit of a sense of kind of who in the survey. Okay, we've got somebody who's just joined in on the thing, but that's okay. Don't mind if they've joined in the panelist view. So let me. Okay, so the roadmap for today, we've got about an hour. I'm going to try and get through it as quickly as is possible without kind of dumbing down some of the content, so we can leave a bit of time for some Q&A at the end. But essentially, we're going to follow the journey of the report, looking at the ability to scale, which was a big part of the survey, looking at the leadership focus, looking at your overall business performance, and then just a few thoughts on kind of looking ahead and what does that mean for you into 2021. So headlines, let's just start with 3 headlines. The first headline was an interesting one. This kind of notion that I think most people that rated their strategic direction scored themselves quite highly. So, I think directors generally felt they were good at setting strategy, but a complete different score when it came to how well do you align your people. So I think that's an interesting insight right off the bat. We feel we can get the strategy right and we can set the strategy, but we're not getting our people on board, and we are going to pick up on that as we go through the session today. The second big headline for me was change is the priority, which is probably not surprising in the current circumstances. But again, we're going to share some insight on change for you. But around that delivering change piece, I think there's a real difference in language there. Whenever we hear change from business leaders, always around managing change, and suddenly now we've got this delivering change. I think that again just shows how we've got to shift from it's just something I have to manage to something I really now need to deliver on, because again, the world has changed significantly this year for most people. Their confidence is low, so kind of no surprise there really. We've got around 40% of directors saying that they are unsure whether they will achieve their goals next year. So I say no surprises there. I won't dwell on that right here. but again, I will touch on that as we go through the survey. But I probably would say, I think one of the questions I was asking myself when I was reviewing this data was actually, are we still measuring ourselves against what we were expecting to achieve pre-COVID? Because there is a question mark whether we need to be resetting some of our goals as we move forward. Okay, so if we just get in a bit more detail now, the first section, your ability to scale, I thought probably just best for the audience to make sure that we've got some context around this. So if we're talking about business improvement and scaling up, theory 101, this is kind of what it looks like. So if you want to move a business to the next level, theory says the first thing you have to do is you have to start here and get your structure right. So have the right structure with the right people in the right seats, not only to manage your business here today, but to be in a place to be able to be the business you want to be in the future, whatever that looks like for you. After that, there's this whole issue around waste and efficiency. I think that's an interesting one for me in the context of scale, because there are almost no businesses that scale where the inefficiency they carry as small businesses doesn't compound itself as they grow. So kind of what that means is that most scale-ups, yes, they grow, but often they make less money and in some instances start to lose money. So that's why we have this visible, invisible piece here. Most waste isn't just stuff we're throwing away, it's how we're not releasing the potential of our resources and not utilising ourselves well enough. And again, I'll touch on that a bit more as we go through the session today. And then finally, the kind of mindsets and beliefs of our people. We need to have our people behind us and believing we can do what we can do, and the whole culture piece comes into that as well, obviously. And then kind of typically, if we take these numbers as months, theory says that, this is how long it takes to really make big impacts on those areas as you go on your journey. So that's kind of 101, but in terms of what scale up kind of looks like in practice, there's kind of more to it than that. So we take those 3 sections and put them in the middle with performance. You have to be managing performance at functional, team and individual level. And then around that, there are factors that need to be considered, like your business model. Is it scalable and sustainable? Have we got clear direction and strategic planning? Are we doing the action we need to do and measuring it accordingly? Are we delivering on change? And do we have that leadership capability that we need to take ourselves to the next level? And kind of where that leaves you on scale up is there's no silver bullet, unfortunately. Again, I think lots of businesses want to scale. When you look at the percentage of businesses that actually are high growth and that actually are scaling, it is very, very small. And I think that hopefully that model kind of gives you some context as to why. So move that then back into the survey. Oops, sorry, I should have just figured that on there. Yeah, obviously I didn't talk about culture, but say obviously, but I think maybe we forget that culture kind of pins that all together. So moving that back into the survey now. As we said, scale up is a challenge. Probably what got you here won't get you where you want to get to. So that's, I think, another piece that leaders find difficult. They have to make some tough decisions and do things differently, not just about people, but all sorts of things within their business. But I think some of the things that came out of the data was that around that action and measurement, we had a real low score where, there probably is a need for clearer goals with our people. But I think what I picked out of that as well is that we've probably got a lack of accountability, and the amount of conversations I'm having now about whether performance management is in existence at all or whether it's effective, I think kind of backs that one up as well. The business models are strong. I kind of read that and went, yeah, I kind of agree. I probably can't remember the last time I was with a business where fundamentally the model was wrong. I suppose the model really just is, we have a business model that kind of ultimately enables us to trade goods and deliver those goods at a profit. I mean, that's ultimately what our business model should deliver. And I think most businesses have kind of got that fairly well nailed down. I think what they don't then have is the strategy to deliver it, or they don't have the people aligned to that strategy, which is what the report is now saying. And that's then, I suppose, when we feeds back into that kind of leaders are struggling to get their people on board. I kind of want to spend a bit of time just sharing some insights on that. But I think when you talk about leaders struggling to get their people on board, I think that does pin straight back into the action and measurement. And I wonder if part of that is, it's not just about are they aligned and are they bought in, it's actually are they accountable. So I think we probably need to think of that in 2 contexts. Okay, so what I thought I'd share with you in terms of this kind of this gap between our strategic ability versus our ability to align our people to our strategy is a strategy process that we use. And there will be other examples, but I'm just going to share ours just to help sort of try and explore some ways that you might be able to work this through. I'm going to start, I think, where most people start, which is in the development box, in the second box. So I think this is where leaders are saying that they're pretty strong, they can build a strategy. That's pretty good. I suppose my challenge would be, we think we're building good strategy, but if our people are not aligned to it, maybe there is a challenge of is it as good as we think it is? And And I think probably the lessons that we've learned over the years is building strategy is not often a single event. So when we're developing strategy, I think there's a need to do some kind of build, but I think there needs to be a period of percolation before we kind of finally set down on what we're going to do. So I see lots of people sitting down, you know, once a year, coming up with a strategy, and then they kind of, that's it, they go away and it's done. And there's no time to kind of stop and reflect and percolate as to, you know, what they've been thinking, reviewing and assessing and analysing, and then finalising that down, having had some time to reflect, bearing in mind that some people need that to come to the right place. What we I think we find as well then, but you move before that, before we go into alignment, is there's a real lack of time spent just engaging the people that are going to be doing the strategy. So there's probably a couple of things here to think about. You know, are you just doing the strategy on your own? And should you be? And if you are doing it with, you know, your leadership team, are you spending some time to really engage those stakeholders in the process and understand where they're really at, and scoping out what that strategy build is going to look like in terms of the process you're going to go through and what you want to achieve based on where you are on your journey currently? And if you do that, the development piece for me is always stronger. There's less elephants in the room, there's less kind of agendas being played out. And then it allows you to move through that development phase and then into that piece, that alignment piece. I think the alignment piece for me just very often just isn't there at all. I'll probably confess that I was probably guilty of that myself, not just in my corporate life, but even in our firm, where that sort of next step of making sure that everyone in the business was aligned to it, we just kind of just skipped over it. That's where what we call base camp comes in. And I think the rule there is just the more people you can involve in some form of event or process to get them to understand, buy in, and ultimately take ownership of the strategy, because I think that's the other thing about alignment. It's not about just do they buy into it, it's are they going to take it on and run with it for us? Otherwise we end up doing it ourselves, which is obviously impractical. So I think that's where that alignment piece comes in on one level. And then obviously what you then need to do is move that into implementation, because we need to get past hopes and dreams. And I think many business leaders are guilty here of doing lots of strategic work and then just in reality just hoping and dreaming it comes true, and you know, often it doesn't. So making sure that implementation is a very proactive thing, you know, where you're coaching people, some form of program to kind of make sure that people are kind of on that strategy and implementing that strategy, and obviously then from time to time having some way to reset and refine it, because again, strategy is very rarely perfect, so there's always lessons learned and ability to improve and take it on to the next level. But that's kind of just a bit of thinking around, you know, how you might start to think about alignment in the process. Ultimately, obviously what we want to do is cascade, and so this model I think again helps with that kind of alignment piece. So the strategic planning model we put here, you know, basically says, you know, underneath it we have to have a scalable and sustainable business model. I think most people have that, which is a positive. But you know, when we develop strategy, ultimately it starts with direction. Who are we? Where are we going? What's our roadmap? What's our purpose? All that kind of big stuff. But that has to be cascaded into what does that mean in terms of how we go to market and connect with our customers. How do we then have a sales, service, operation strategy to deliver that? And then how do we enable the business to succeed by having strategies around our people, our finance, our compliance, if that's relevant for you, and innovation to make sure we keep it fresh. So there's definitely a kind of an order of things in strategy that you have to move through. And probably, I suppose, the mistake businesses make is they don't work through that order, or they just kind of jump straight into sales strategy. We need a sales strategy with nothing to pin it to in terms of where we're actually going and what market are we serving. So in terms of alignment, which I think is kind of what's come out of the survey, so the question for me is you know, are we following the order of things? Are we then cascading it down through the business? And probably more importantly, as we cascade it down through the business and engage more people in the strategy, are we getting them to take ownership? Because I think in the best businesses, not only do we cascade it through, but as we cascade it through, we hand it over. And our people are really doing the legwork on coming up with strategies around these lower level areas that ultimately deliver on our overarching direction. So we can kind of just step back and stay in a leadership role and keep that direction moving forward. Okay, so a couple of things there on alignment that hopefully help. Staying with the scale up piece, we said right at the beginning that, you know, that change was the big theme from this, and we are going to come back to that in a second. I think leaders generally score themselves relatively highly on that. Maybe contradicted slightly by the fact they also said it needs to be, you know, it's their biggest focus. So I suppose I'm questioning, you know, are we overconfident around change is probably my insight from that. I said, but I'm going to come back to that in a second. Confidence in managers is low. I'm going to talk about that quite extensively in a second. which I think may be linked to that alignment piece as well. But I think the big one here was lots of waste. So the lowest score on the report this year was businesses talking about their waste and inefficiency. So I think that's kind of interesting, because in terms of scale up, as I sort of talked about in kind of just theory 101, you know, we almost carry inefficiency as a necessity as a small organization when we're starting up. We're kind of all going to muck in, roll up our sleeves, do a bit of everything. And it's in itself, it's inefficient. And as you grow, that inefficiency compounds itself, which is kind of going back to my point that most businesses, as they scale, see their profits eroded, if not turned into losses. So I think probably the question here is, are you tackling that invisible waste to unlock that potential efficiency? You know, where it's like we could be doing it in a different way, a different process. And ultimately, I think the questions people need to be asking themselves are we just doing more with more? So as we are growing, are we just adding more resource to do more, which is where that inefficiency compounds itself? Are we thinking of ways that we could do more, be more, get to the next level with the same resource, although it maybe need to be shaped slightly differently? You know, and ultimately, you know, really slick businesses, you know, can we do more with less? You know, can we leverage technology? Can we re-engineer the way we do things so we get the same outcomes and do the same things with actually less resource? So that's maybe just a sort of 3 questions to ask yourself around the way you're tackling waste. When we look at these areas, again, the two at the bottom there, proactive management needed was back in the action and measurement. For me, I think we've, you know, comes back to that thing about, have we got good performance management? Are we holding people accountable? Have we got clear goals? And I think I probably start to think there about, you know, proactive performance management really is about coaching. You know, do we have a culture of coaching within our performance management, or are we just in that old-fashioned world of appraisals that, you know, everybody dreads, employee and employer, that doesn't deliver any value? And you know, and despite, you know, the challenges of mindset, you know, mindset is strong. It's kind of like, for me, not really a surprise. Leaders are resilient, and so I'm not surprised that leaders are still fairly positive. I think probably, though, there's a big warning with that around. There's a difference between us and our people, and I'll speak more about that later. I think probably where I think we didn't ask this question, but just an observation. I think the mindset is strong in leaders, but I think they're getting tired. So I think it's more of a fatigue issue for leaders, but I think there was a mindset challenge with our people that I want to talk about before we finish. So that kind of takes us to the sort of big one here was, you know, across the board, we had quite a low score, not quite as bad as waste, but a low score around structuring for success. And again, go back to 101 of scaling a business up. You know, if you haven't got the structure that's going to enable you to get to and stay at the next level, you're going to really struggle to move forward. There is without doubt a correlation between understanding the structure you need to be the business you want to be in 3, 5, 10 years time, and the quicker you can move towards it, the quicker you will scale. There's lots of evidence that is the case. So I pose probably maybe one question there is, you know, do you have that vision, that blueprint of the future structure you need, and are you moving towards it, you know, in any way you can? There's obviously stepping stones between where you're starting today and where you want to end up, but ultimately you need to know loosely where you're going to be making steps towards it. And if you're getting that right, and some of you on the session today have done this with me, you know, ultimately you're structuring around roles and functions, not around people. And that's, I suppose, one of the challenges again about what got you here won't get you there. Some of those people that may have served you very well for 10 years or more may not actually have a place in your organization going forward. So I think that's where structuring becomes quite challenging on an emotional level as business leaders. Okay, so the next section was around this kind of leadership focus. I think the really interesting but maybe not surprising summary of this was basically the directors and leaders that filled in this questionnaire thought their leadership was pretty damn good. They thought the people that kind of were around them, either at peer level or kind of on their senior team, weren't quite as strong, but still fairly good. But everybody underneath them was kind of way off the mark. One of the lowest scoring sections in the survey. So I think there's a couple of insights for me here is probably would be wrong to say that the most senior leaders weren't the best leaders, but I think there is a challenge there about, you know, actually are we being vulnerable enough there? You know, actually are we as good as we think we are? And you know, are we open to learning, maybe even unlearning things that we've picked up along our journey? Because I think most leaders that are truly great understand it's an ongoing journey of development. So there's, I suppose, a challenge there as to how highly we rank ourselves as leaders versus where we really are. I think probably the other bit to that is if the people around us and the people below us, we don't think are as good as they need to be, maybe that's a reflection of our leadership also. So that's probably another part to challenge on that. But I think if we go into those more junior leaders, as up and coming leaders, whatever you in your own context you describe as the leaders underneath you, I suppose my question is: are we allowing them to be leaders? Are we empowering them? And ultimately, are we developing them? Which is kind of what I wanted to share a couple of insights with you on. I was just kind of looking at this in the context of flow. So for those that haven't seen the flow model, it's a psychology model by Mihaly, whose second name I won't pronounce because I never can. But the whole concept of flow is that when we're in flow, and I think if you think about this in your own context, when you're doing something and you kind of you're in the zone, it's effortless. You're smashing it out of the park. You're doing the best work without becoming exhausted. You could be sitting there, you think for 20 minutes and you've been there for 3 hours and you don't know how the 3 hours pass because it's just so enjoyable. That's kind of when we're in flow. And the flow ultimately is defined by a complete balance between your skill and capability and the difficulty and challenge that's put alongside you. So when the difficulty and challenge matches your skill and capability, you're in that flow. The challenge is if your skill and capability are not being met by the challenge, then we tend to move into apathy and ultimately boredom. And if the challenge and difficulty is outweighs your capability, then we move into anxiety and ultimately panic. And I think in the context of our junior leaders, I kind of thought about this and thought, well, where are they going? Are they going straight up the middle? Are we continually developing their capability as we grow and challenge them, keeping them in flow? Are we just challenging them, putting them under pressure and hoping that they'll rise to the challenge, and they're probably living most of their life in anxiety and probably some cases panic? Or have we got people around us that we're just not, we're not empowering enough and could do more, and they're actually, we're underusing them. They're just sitting there bored out of their brains, wishing they could do something more interesting. So I think that's kind of the question there. And I think the reality here is that when you think about people that we promote into leadership, which is obviously the group we're talking about now, they typically will still, even in this day and age, get promoted based on the fact they've done a technically good job in whatever their discipline is. And then move them into leadership or management or both. And we don't really help them develop the capability and the skills they need to do that job. So we probably, in almost every case, send every leader initially into that journey of 3, which I think we need to think about. I kind of was also thinking that when you consider that reward and recognition very rarely and almost never sustainably motivates people. What motivates people is having a sense of purpose, having the ability to master something, so learn, and have the autonomy to do it their own way, hence why they like to be empowered. When you kind of put that all together, that's quite a heady mix for us to reflect on about, what are we actually doing to the people that are coming through underneath us. And actually, we've probably got a bigger responsibility than we realise to help them get in that flow path. So that's just a kind of a different way to maybe look at that for you. I think when you look at that, obviously there's no doubt we have to develop capability. I think that's more than just training, which is kind of why I thought we ought to flick this model up. So for those that haven't seen this before, we know, not just leaders, but anybody, this is how we develop, and it's how we develop capability. Training people, giving people knowledge, sending them on courses, getting them to, do anything that acquires knowledge, is just learning. And all that does is gives us competency, and competency is only 10% of the way to the ability to be capable. Then people need to apply it on the job. So if we're going to develop leaders, we need to teach them skills, absolutely. But how are we going to get them to apply that and gain experience quickly, in the real world? And then ultimately, how are we going to give them feedback so they can refine their experience and then master it and then build that capability through coaching and mentoring. So any journey you're taking your leaders on needs to encompass all these 3 things. Okay, so just staying on leadership, I suppose just quickly touching on the 3 priorities of leadership: delivering change. We touched on direction and team alignment, and the vision. I'm thinking probably people are wondering where their vision needs to change. EQ generally scored quite highly. I'm not going to spend time on EQ today, but I think with my background, I think my challenge is there. I think what we're saying there, if EQ is high, we have a group of leaders generally in our business that have got incredibly high self-awareness, that show lots of empathy, really good self-control, and are experts at inspiring and influence others. If we think that's true, then great, we've got a really highly EQ set of people. But I suspect on reflection, most businesses, when they actually reflect on that more fully, probably change their mind on that. So that's maybe just something to take away and reflect on. And I think, again, that empowering others proves a challenge. So again, we're saying our people are not aligned, they're not performing, they're not accountable, but we're not empowering them either. So there's definitely, it starts with empowering people. If we're not empowering them, then not surprisingly, they're not accountable, etc., etc. But the bit I wanted to pick up on this, because it is the big one that's come right through the whole survey, is this whole notion of delivering change. So this is the reality of change. Every piece of research, I think probably for the last 30 years, has said, in business generally, when we do any change initiative, 70% fail, 30% succeed. And the piece I want to share with you today, and for those that have already seen it, I'm not going to apologise because I think it never gets tired, is that back in 2008, one of my colleagues, Chris, set on a piece of work that was born out of the fact that this stat kept coming out. In fact, it still does to this day. He had a friend that continually struggled to get his business where it needed to be and ended up killing himself. So that kind of focused his mind. And there was a survey done at that time as well, looking at when the most original piece of management theory was last brought through, which was, it turned out to be over 50 years. So this kind of notion that, we're using the same old management tools, getting the same old results. And then Chris himself had a friend that was now dead at the back of it, kind of kicked him on to go and do a PhD in psychological change, come up with the first piece of management theory in over 50 years, and then come up with a change model that kind of reversed this. Because even in that piece of work, what we learned was we're not just getting 30% of success, what we're getting is nearly 100% failure in change. And then if we are persistent enough to keep going and keep trying again, eventually we get it over the line, and then we'll get 30% of them through. So that's where that notion of change is time consuming, it's exhausting, it's costly comes from. It's just the effort that we put into getting anything through. It's so inefficient, it's so emotionally draining on people. That's where that all comes from, because very few things happen immediately. So kind of taking that on board, there's a myth, I think, in change as well that we probably need to be aware of if this is our big focus for next year, that this myth that people don't like change, I would say it's a myth. The fact that the statement that people don't like change is a myth. People have no issue with change. When you ask people if they want change, they all put their hand up. They start to shrink a little bit when we ask them to change personally. I think everyone's challenged with that. And then, of course, leading change is a whole another matter again. But what's really going on here is that there is a big disconnect between the pace at which people are prepared to change and how safe they feel with change. And without going into too much of the technical detail, it's hugely different between leaders and generally the general population of people that work for us, just based on where we are in our life journeys. So we need to accept that people absolutely want change and are prepared to change, but the pace at which they're prepared to do so and how safe they feel doing so is the challenge of leadership. I just wanted to sort of share that with you. In terms of practically, you kind of need a formula for change, I think, if you're going to really pick it up. This is just ours. We know you need a proven change model. That's been a challenge because there hasn't been one until Chris did his work recently, which I'm going to share with you in a second, which is that left-hand side. But kind of ultimately, what's your way of implementing excellently? We kind of put this thing here that ultimately, you need a vision and a plan, the same as you do for strategy. Strategy works when there's a vision and a plan because people now know where you want to go and you've given them a bit of a roadmap to get there. And I think change initiatives need the same thing. What's the process within your company to actually push change through? Leadership is critical, and I'll touch on that in a second. It probably needs teams. I see individuals struggling to drive change through, when these are big game-changing projects that, they need help with, big things, great things, ultimately need teams working on them, and how are we monitoring and auditing them? That's so we kind of use that model to kind of bring this all together. But just to sort of touch on that leadership piece, one of the other things that came out of the work that's been done over the last 10 years or so is that there's an absolute correlation between the amount of transformational leadership versus transactional leadership in change as to whether it's successful. So just to explain what that means, transformational leaders are kind of those visionary, inspiring, influencing, forward-thinking leaders, the Richard Bransons of this world, if you like. While transactional leaders are more kind of the here and now, what I would call leading the management. So making sure that we're doing the things we need to do today to be successful. So kind of caution here, you need both in business to be successful. They're both as important as each other. A business with no transactional leadership will be a mess very quickly and fall over. And a transactional business will be really clean and tidy for a while and then fall over as the market moves away from it. So it's the blend that's really critical. But when you are trying to drive change, there has to be a dominance of transformational leadership. So maybe a question for you here is, what kind of leader are you? You'll have a bit of both, I'm sure, but you'll be dominant probably one way or the other. And I think if you're not dominant around transformational leadership, who else in your leadership team can kind of step in and kind of push that transformational balance up so that your project's got more chance of being pushed through. So that's just a little kind of leadership insight there for you to take forward. So the change model that I mentioned that Chris developed, I wanted to share because change has come through today. And so I won't apologize for those that have seen this a number of times on the call, but it's so powerful. The data on this, the PhD was turned into a model that's been now applied in the field for 10 years. The data is continually being collected. This model now has a success rate of over 80%. So we've gone from a 30% success rate, albeit most of those are failures, to if you follow this model, to the letter, you will have an 80% success rate of change. So that is a phenomenal flip in our ability to drive change through based on scientific and data to back it up. So for those that haven't seen this model before, what we have learned is what actually sits at the core of change success is not just getting the beliefs of people, which is where we tended to spend most of our time. Let's get everyone behind us, believing we can do this. That still has a place, but actually there's a huge need to be ready for change. And actually we also need to have the capability within us to do it as well. And those things very rarely talked about in change in the past. So I'll quickly describe them. For those that have not seen this before. Readiness in terms of leadership support. So if people, and you have to think about a change in the context of the particular change, and you need to think about it in terms of everyone that will be impacted by the change. So when we look at leadership support, all the people impacted by the change, if they do not feel they have the support of the leadership, both emotionally and physically, they will resist the change. They need to believe there is a need for change, otherwise they'll resist it. All the individuals will ask themselves, either consciously or subconsciously, what's in it for me? So this actually is the biggest driver statistically. So we need to understand that whatever you're asking me to do, I think there's something in it for me to do it. Massively challenging, because you could have 100 people working for you and you could have, theoretically 100 what's in it for me's. And what we tend to do in change is give everybody one story as to why this is a good idea to do it. And what you've actually got is probably 7 stories amongst that 100 people that need to be told. You also potentially have people within your organization where there's nothing in it for them at all. And you can't ignore that. You have to address that and work out how you're going to get them to help you buy into it without actually there being anything in it for them. The next one is unusual. People aren't surprised by this, but people actually will ask themselves, can I see the process by which this change is going to go through? Because they can't see the process, they tend to resist the change. Hence why in our model, we've got the change process piece. And the confidence piece is built around your kind of, I suppose, your history. So if you've got a history of having lots of ideas and initiatives and they eventually just witter out and you never deliver on them, people will just go, oh, here we go again, another initiative. Just keep your head down, it will go away, and then we'll be back to our normality again fairly soon. So again, if that kind of confidence exists in your organization, you do need to tackle it and change it. Capability is kind of personal and organizationally. So individuals will, in a change situation, before they even think about what you want them to do, ask themselves, if I do, can I actually do what I'm supposed to be doing now? Because if people don't believe that what they're doing now they're capable of, they won't even think about something different. But if they are, they'll then ask the same question of what you want them to do. Do I think I will still be capable if I start doing what you want me to do? And if they think the answer to that is no, they will resist the change. So there's lots of things in there about, are people confident? Do they have the right skills and training? All those kind of things. People also do that of the organization. So, if as an organization we're not delivering on what we should be doing today, people will resist any new change. But also, if you are, they'll still question whether they think we will still be able to deliver on the new initiative. So you do need to address that and make sure people believe in that. And then the last things I think are probably just the things we would expect, the belief stuff. So general attitude to change, positive or negative, how difficult people perceive it. The more difficult they perceive it to be, the more they resist it. And there's probably the surprising one in the psychology, if you like, is the significant others. People will ask themselves, if I did this thing, would the people that are important to me think well of me? And that's challenging because different individuals, different groups have different significant others. For some, it might be their mates down the pub. For some, it might be their you know, their families, others it might be their peers. So, but you know, people, we need to know that if people were sitting in front of the people that mattered to them and they had to tell them what they were doing, that they would be proud and would believe that those people would think it's a good idea. So that's probably, for me, that one and the what's in it for me are probably the two big challenging levers in this model. So I just wanted to share that with you. On our SailShift website, there we've got a couple of diagnostics that you can access if you want to kind of backed up by that science. There's a couple of diagnostics there. One around the change success diagnostic for the organisation, but also we've also converted that into a personal change diagnostic as well, because the data is slightly different for personal change. It's similar but slightly different. So you can run any change initiative you have, either personally or from an organizational perspective, through those diagnostics. Just go and help yourself to those if you want to just test out that information. Okay, I know I'm looking quite quickly here, but I want to leave some time for some questions. So I'll just finish up on the leadership focus piece. Just summarizing here, I suppose, the top three capabilities of leadership, you know, as answered by the people in the survey, and the bottom three. I think things I wanted just to touch on there. I think problem solving for me, I think is quite symptomatic of where we've been for the last 9 months now. I think everyone's been in problem solving mode. I think probably the question there is, you know, as a leader, are you solving all the problems? And I think this where might be some of the kind of the exhaustion and fatigue is coming from in leaders that I'm seeing, is that if you're one coming up with all the answers and solving all the problems, particularly, and maybe you just felt it necessary because we've been in a crisis, but that's not sustainable. And actually, you know, going back to the leadership from beneath us, we need everyone in the business solving problems. So that's probably just a watch, but I mean, a great skill to have, obviously. We believe we're great at setting the vision, and we believe we're great at direction and team alignment, although almost everybody also said that they can't get their teams aligned. So that's an interesting point of reflection for people that have done the survey. The bottom three, again, I think, you know, do dovetail into some of the other data that's come through. Coaching for performance, you know, we've talked about that. Performance management, accountability, getting people to deliver is difficult. So, you know, if we're not coaching, then that will continue to be so. And I think there's a direct correlation between that and number three there, which is the delegation empowerment. You know, we need to be delegating authority and empowering people and then holding them accountable, and that requires coaching. So there's a whole loop there to close for you when you reflect on that. I think the managing risk and scenario planning, I think that needs a little bit of reflection as well, because I think if we're not doing that well, and we say we're not, I think there's an impact on that on people's well-being, particularly in a crisis. And obviously we're in a super crisis at the moment. And I'm going to touch on that in a second, but I think you ought to be thinking about that, because people want certainty. There is no certainty, but you know, ultimately one way to get certainty is for people to feel that, you know, what might happen, we've got some handle on how we might deal with it. So just a point of okay. And I suppose just to sort of build on that, I think this is probably a good point. Now, people are saying that, and I think it comes up in a later slide, that one of the big focuses for next year is their vision. And I think when people stop and reflect, ultimately, you know, we'll try to climb whatever our mountain looks like and get to our summit, whatever that is for us, you know. And I'm not convinced that even with this avalanche of COVID that's hit us, that, you know, where we're trying to get to has changed a great deal. We've just got a great big dump of snow in between us and where we were going. So, you know, it's probably, you know, we're saying it's the same mountain, we just might need a new path to the summit, and we might need some new tactics. And when I talked about, you know, our aspirations for next year, now maybe it's going to take us longer now. So, you know, I think all that needs some reflection. But, you know, I think probably going back to the managing risk and scenarios, you know, this will not be the last crisis. There will be another recession. There will be other things that happen, you know. So having the ability to not just manage risk, but have scenario plans in place so that, you know, whatever happens, you know, we know how to navigate around it, or we have alternative plans, I think is really, really critical. You know, an extreme example for me, we had a client in Australia who in the 2008 GFC, their business was completely, it was wrecked. It was like being in hospitality now. It was completely wrecked. They completely pivoted their business. They are now at the other side, doing nothing that they were doing pre-2008 and twice the size they were before 2008. So, but it's because they had that agility and that ability to sort of scenario plan and manage the risk through that I think enabled them to do that without completely collapsing. So just a bit of reflection there on that one. Okay, so moving into the business performance, I think there's what we've done here is we've basically asked people to talk about how well they performed in those areas, and kind of we'll take it by your own measurement. But what we also wanted to do is post some questions, I think probably to give you indicators. So when you see your platforms, you'll see what you scored yourself in terms of how well you think you performed in those areas. But you'll also see a dial which you may have a green performance based on your own measure, but you may have a red indicator, which just means I think there's some risk there that you're not doing the things that you need to do to sustain that performance. And so picking up on the three here, sales was interesting. So the lowest scoring one, 5 out of 10. A big percentage of people scoring only 5 out of 10 or less on sales performance, which interestingly enough completely maps with the global performance of sales currently, which is running at 53%. So 53% of businesses and sales professionals hitting their targets, quotas, however you like to describe them, which is on the back of a 5-year slide. So sales is a huge issue. Sales, for those that know me know that I've got some background in this, but the whole shift in sales has been huge in the last 12 years. If you're not on that, reach out to me. I've got some stuff I can share with you. But that's a global problem. It isn't just about COVID. I thought it's interesting that marketing wasn't up to scratch either for most people. A few people, I think they're all over it, but I think marketing's an interesting one. I think it's something that people just perceive to be advertising, promotion. But marketing for me is a hugely strategic function that, it's all about your strategic planning, and how that then dovetails into what we do to promote and market our business. And I think lots of people struggle with that, and lots of people either ignore it or cut it off in isolation, and there's probably some different answers to that for different people, but it is a challenge. I think on the operational, so that was really positive. Really people were, generally thought operations was performing highly. I think what I wrote down here and operations is kind of at what cost, because we're all saying that waste is our biggest issue in the scale up model. So we may well be delivering operationally, so getting everything out that is required of us, but are we doing it as efficiently as possible? Are we driving continuous improvement to re-engineer our processes to do it more efficiently? Or actually is operations performing really, really well, but actually sapping our profits? There's probably the reflection point for me on operations. Just generally, HR was the area that felt needed the most improvement outside of those, and the financial performance was scoring the highest. Let's just give you a headline on the other areas. Probably listening to what else has come through this presentation, I just go to, are we using HR to do what we want to, which they should be supporting and empowering the management to do their job. And I wonder sometimes if we lean on HR to do our jobs for us, our managers, our leaders should be line managing, performance managing, coaching, and HR should be there to support those things and should be the guardians of the culture, etc., etc. So maybe there's just a bit of reflection there and kind of what is your HR department doing? Is it trying to fill in for the inequities of our leadership and our management, or is it actually doing the productive strategic stuff that it should be doing? Okay, so just kind of finishing off and kind of looking ahead. We said it's challenging. I don't want to dwell too much on this slide, but I think there's a huge slug of people that are unsure about next year, not surprisingly, but I think I go back to plans and scenarios. The only way to overcome that uncertainty is to think about different scenarios, have different plans. It won't give you certainty, but it will certainly give you more comfort that you can cope with the different things that can happen. We put some stuff together at the beginning of COVID around scenario planning. So, but if any of you think you need to go back to that and get stronger at that, then again, more than happy to share that offline if you just want to reach out to me. And then, growth was fairly spread, but, very most people either shrunk, stood still, or grew by less than 10%, which is not surprising with what's just happened to us. But again, that might be a question about, do we need to realign our expectations? I know we're under huge pressure from ourselves, from shareholders in some cases, to achieve certain growth targets, but actually it might be a bit of a time to have some realism about what's really practical in the next 12 months, rather than driving our teams onto something that's unachievable, and add into that well-being and that stress that's already there, I think, in our teams. The top 3 growth areas, and it's like, so just spinning straight off that, everyone's saying the top focus is growth, and it was the biggest by a long stretch. I think for me that was interesting, because we've got most people saying that growth is their number 1 focus, and our 2 lowest scores in terms of performance were sales and marketing. So I think that everyone's got some work to do there. And then the fact that diversification and expansion to new markets was second, I thought was interesting, because I think that's what people have decided that they need to do. So rather than actually sort their sales and their marketing out, it's like, let's go into some new markets, or let's diversify. So I kind of just dropped the growth model there on the right-hand side. It's that the quickest way to grow is to sell more of the stuff we sell now to the people that already know us. And the minute you start to go into different markets, or even bring in new products, it gets more difficult. And diversification, it's almost like startup territory. So, I suppose my challenge is, have we really exhausted our existing markets? Because I think most people, unless you're Coca-Cola, there is still huge scope to penetrate your markets further for most people. And I mean, I think in COVID, there are people that are going to need to go beyond that. But I think generally, most people are going outside of that green box, because they're just not selling effectively and not marketing their business correctly. So I think, that's maybe we found the wrong answer there. I think it's probably my challenge. And then profitability, which I think is probably, again, not surprising. And I think I'd probably going to look at your waste and efficiency, because that's probably where the answer to that lies. Although, again, back into marketing, getting more effective with your marketing strategy will enable you to add more value in the market and charge higher prices. So I think that mix of waste and efficiency and stronger marketing strategy will probably both help with that profitability challenge. So just one thing I just want to finish on sales and marketing. In terms of sales, which obviously is a challenge if you want to grow, and in this market, and a challenge because we're not doing it very well, according to this report, is ultimately high performance sales environments are an integration of selling and marketing. And this is something that has been, the two have been being pushed apart probably for 100 years. And I'm just starting to see some seeds of where people are starting to recognize they need to come back together, and where they are, the growth in those businesses is phenomenal. And if you kind of want to look for where the clues of this are, if I take you to John Patterson, who was the founder of the National Cash Register, NCR company, seen as the father of modern selling. Pretty much everything we're working at that we need to do now in this new sales world, he was doing in the 1800s. We spent the last 100 years undoing all that, and then thinking we need to go back to that. And that was actually quite right, including his own company, I think, quite sadly. But in those days, marketing didn't exist. And what Patterson did, as well as being the father of modern selling, he invented things like direct mail and testimonials and advertising and publicity. So, selling and marketing were one of the same thing. And then when you kind of, even look at the Chartered Institute of Marketing. So marketing now a very respected profession. It's a chartered institute, but it didn't start as the Chartered Institute of Marketing. It was the Sales Managers Association that then 1921 became the Incorporated Sales Managers Association. And it wasn't until the 60s that it then started to bring marketing into its name, because marketing, became more of a thing. In the late 60s, it then became the CIM that we know today. And interestingly enough, it's dropped the word sales, which I think says more about the way that we've deprofessionalized selling, rather than how much marketing has progressed. And I think that's probably a point to think about here, as well as the integration. Selling is a profession, and I think we've lost that over the last probably 30, 40, 50 years. But when selling is done well, and particularly in this modern environment, it is a profession, and we need to ask ourselves, are we employing, are we building professional salespeople, and are we integrating our marketing and selling activities to get that high performing sales environment? That's probably what you need to be thinking about there, if you're one of those people that's got real challenges around sales and marketing and wants to grow your business. Okay, so I just wanted to, at this point, for the future, just make sure I dropped in something about the Director Circle, a bit of a plug. I apologise for that, but I know there's people that want to think about, kind of how they could take some of this on. So outside of our business improvement practice, we have our Director Circle, which is our exclusive community for business leaders that we run not just in the UK, but over in Australia, New Zealand, the US. There are going to be a host of new groups launching in the new year for you to join, where we'll go into these things in a lot more detail, but I think more importantly, where you'll have a community of fellow directors. Nobody's allowed in isn't a fellow director. So that's an opportunity, I think, then to get involved in that community and really start to accelerate this journey. So I just wanted to mention that we'll be doing that in the new year once the restrictions allow us to do that. And if you want to just talk about that or any of these things, just kind of reach out to me, email me, phone me, whatever works for you. So in terms of what next, the report will be published next week. So you'll obviously get that sent through to you with the platform that I mentioned. So you'll have your dashboard that will be linked to the data that you put into your report. And as we kind of get ready to be unlocked on Monday, although I think where I am in Birmingham, I won't be unlocked. So just my lockdown continues, apart from I can go to a few more shops. So my trip to the US in December is definitely cancelled. So I've asked my PA just to put some feedback time available in my diary. So anybody wants any feedback on any of this stuff or wants to talk about anything, I'm just conscious lots of people are in some challenging situations at the moment. So if you're one of those, or if you just want to talk through any of this stuff, just out of interest, I'm always happy to talk about it. Just reach out and I'm happy to give you a slot, just to have a conversation about anything that's come out of this for you or anything that's challenging you currently. And I think probably I'm not going to summarize today, but I think I'll just finish with a bit of perspective. In terms of, ultimately now I think from a business perspective, we go into recession. So I think the perspective for me is that, a recession is not a collapse of the market. So the market has already shrunk, it will continue to shrink, but whether we end up 10% smaller, 15% smaller, I don't know what the number will be, but most of the market will still be there. And I think, we need to hold on to the fact that, yes, that is going to make it difficult, but the market isn't disappearing. So don't get paralyzed into, there's no market for us now. There's just less of a market. I think the real context is that what really happens is the market doesn't shrink unilaterally. There will be winners and there will be losers. So, for yourselves, you may be in a winning market, a losing market, or maybe a market that's not affected at all. And of course, you need different strategies accordingly. But I think probably more importantly, when you're looking to go out there and maintain and grow your business, thinking about where you're looking for business, start looking for those winners and those winners markets and those kind of static markets, and make sure you don't waste time on markets that are completely on their backsides. So that's probably the better way to focus that. Just keeping that theme of change, there are no laws against or barriers to change. I talked about our client in Australia that's completely reinvented their business. And I'm talking about a business over tens of millions, by the way, not a small startup. There's no laws or barriers against it. It's just up to us. So, you need to really reflect on that. And I think probably the final thing for me is that great businesses and salespeople increase their effort in a crisis. Now, there is no doubt, if we just stay on that theme of sales, as it was a big theme of the survey, that almost every great salesperson I know posts their biggest numbers in a recession, which always surprises people. But when you think about it, it doesn't surprise me, because good salespeople know they just need to double their efforts, keep the intensity going in a recession, whereas other salespeople just get scared and paralyzed by the fact that we're in a recession. So the fact that they're still out there and busy, and the fact that everyone else has stopped, usually means they end up winning more. So, it requires effort. It's going to be tough, but if you keep that intensity going, if you can increase that intensity, the chances are you're actually move forward rather than stand still or go backwards. Okay. And I did say I wanted to pick up the final point was on this mindset piece. So great to see leaders feeling positive. I'm not surprised. As I said, watch that exhaustion and fatigue. We probably do need to make sure we rest up. But this was a slide we were using right back at the start of COVID. And we're talking about that journey of people, and what was we called a pivot point. People, lots of uncertainty, devastation. People became exhausted, lots of loss of purpose. And then there's a kind of pivot point where people started going, okay, there's a bit of a ray of light now. I think we'll be okay. Yeah, okay, I can see the opportunity. I'm feeling energized. And I think that journey is still there. I think it's been elongated for some. For some, it's been less intense. But I think what we said a while back and what we're saying now, I think, is that what we're seeing is that as leaders, I think we're fairly positive. Other than the tiredness, we're kind of out through the pivot point. I'm not convinced a lot of our staff are. And it may be in some of our customers, depending on their spaces they're in. So I think as leaders, we have to be really mindful of where we are, but where are our people, and get our messaging and our communication spot on, so that we show that some empathy and help them through things that we maybe have moved through more quickly because we're more resilient. But I think there's definitely a piece there about, where am I, but where are my people, and what am I going to do about that? So hopefully that's just a good final piece of reflection. I did take the whole hour, but I still want to leave it open for some questions. So I'll just stop sharing. Can you hear me, Nate?
Yeah, perfect, mate.
Is there any? I've not been watching the chat, so was there anything that's been picked up? And if you're in the room, feel free to put your hand up. I'll give you the floor if you prefer to speak openly on the mic. If not, drop something in the chat.
I've had a couple DM'd to me. Well done, first, mate. That was a whistle stop hour of how to scale a business. Yeah, I've had a couple DM'd to me, and one David's just put in the chat as well. So it's something I was thinking about, actually. So why do you think? Obviously, change was the big thing that came out of the report, but why do you think it's so rarely successful?
What do I think is so rarely successful? I think it's underestimated. So here's an interesting thing that came out of the work that Chris did, is that they did a comparison between what great leaders were doing with change and what good leaders were doing with change, and then there's obviously the rest. Okay, and there's very little difference between good and great leaders. There's a massive difference between good and great and the rest. But one of the things that was different between good and great is that good leaders had more confidence about change than great leaders. So it's kind of back to front. And when you interrogate what's going on there is that great leaders, they don't underestimate how hard it is. And so they take it more seriously. And so all those factors that I talked about in the model that Chris developed and that we've moved into operational application, they don't skim over them. They really, so and I think so the bad leaders in change just do very little of it. They just try and shove it through. And what happens is here's another thing, there's so much to talk about on the change, but is that most leaders will use their authority. So you can implement change through authority, because I'm more senior than you, I have more power than you, I employ you, do what I say, and people will respond to that. But what happens then is, of course, it doesn't stick and it unravels over time. So good leaders and great leaders don't do that. They go through those kind of factors consciously or subconsciously, but great leaders they're just not overconfident, and they just make sure they do it properly.
Interesting, man. Just one from me, it's kind of more my area, but describe what an aligned sales and marketing effort would look like in a business. Do you mean that they kind of work literally side by side, or they support each other? How does that flow work in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, the one, and I've got a number of people that I've been talking to on this, but not one of my clients, to be fair, but one of my colleagues at the Association of Professional Sales. He's by definition, he's a CEO now of a £150 million tech business, but he is a salesman by trade, and he, by his own admission, hated marketing. They were a pain in the arse, and did everything he could to stay away from them. And even when he became a CEO, did the same. And then he had a light bulb moment where he went, oh, "I've got this wrong." And he said the minute he got that light bulb moment, everything changed. But yeah, to answer your question directly, they are the same department. They work in the same office, under the same leadership, under the same strategy, under the same plan. It's all joined up because it has to be. It has to be a joined up effort. It's an end-to-end process. So I think this is the objective of selling and marketing, is to get a sale. That's the objective. So why would two departments with the same objective work separately, and often in separate buildings? Let alone it's madness, isn't it? But yeah, so it's just everything. His is a great example, because he'd gone from complete keep them as far away from me as possible to complete integration of everything they did.
That's amazing. Yeah.
When I saw him, actually, he'd got to 5 million turnover with the separation, so he'd done all right. But when he changed it is when he went from 5 million to 100 million plus turnover. So that's, for me, that's easy. That's a powerful outcome, isn't it? Really.
Yeah.
He attributes not all of it, but a lot of it to that change.
Amazing, man. I had one more question from Matt, who I think's left, around waste. And it's really interesting that waste was such a big thing, because if the business is getting bigger, then the waste that exists is just going to multiply. But what are the most common areas you see of waste?
It's not the obvious stuff. We're not just chucking stuff away. So it is that invisible stuff. So this is good and bad, I suppose. Really, it's time probably is probably the big one. I've got a client that that you've worked on with me. We did waste audits through their whole organisation. So they're about £20 million turnover. We did this though when they're about £12 million turnover, and we did a waste audit of every department. So we had about let's say it was 10 departments. They all did their own waste audit, but we didn't call it waste audit because we don't want to be negative. And also people start to think about you're just looking to cut costs and then get rid of us. So we called it a time creation project. How can we create time for you to do more productive, useful things? But the outcome is the same. But all of it was about how much time they spend traveling, how much time they spend doing tasks. It was all about process and just the way they worked. It was all about re-engineering. But I didn't realize this at the time, but the managing partner called me in probably about 14 months afterwards, and I'd forgotten about the project, if I'm honest. And they'd actually said it has £600,000 of bottom line improvement in that past year on it. It's just incredible. But most of it was about just freeing up time. So what that meant was then, of course, their people could do more work, so the top line grew. That's hence why they went from 12 to 19 million. They didn't need to keep employing more people, so it was again about doing more with the same rather than more with more, because they just kept chucking more bodies in as they got bigger. So it probably is time is the big one.
And just on that, I will end shortly. I just find this stuff fascinating. With that process, then, was that consultative? Were you asking the people in those departments how they could create time, or was it from the leader down?
No, we did it the other way. We did it from the bottom up. I think
nice.
there's I don't agree. I think there's a bit of an obsession with everything from the bottom up at the moment, and I agree with it in some instances. And this, I do agree with it. I think others, I'm unconvinced. But yeah, we did it with the people because the thing with waste is the people at the front end that they're living and breathing it. They know where the waste is. They're doing it. So yeah, we didn't have any. In fact, we had no leadership in any of the project teams, and we had at best seniors running the projects, but they were just they weren't managers. So it was it was quite powerful.
Yeah.
Just there's a question in the chat. Can you see that one?
You've answered that one, mate. Yeah, that was the first one I asked.
Okay, great stuff. Okay, I'll leave it open for another few minutes. If anybody wants to stick their hand up, feel free. Just make sure no one's got their hand up and I can't see it. I'll drop it in the chat. I'll happily see it silent for a few seconds because I've learned over COVID with all these virtual things we've done that some people suddenly after a few minutes stick something in. So we'll live with an uncomfortable silence for those people that like to take a little bit longer to drop a question in, and that makes us feel painfully uncomfortable. No, but just to give people that do take a little bit longer, if there is any more questions, I won't drag it out unnecessarily. But I haven't even spoken to you yet about the that marketing piece, and obviously being a brand strategy agency. Anything out of that resonated for you?
Yeah, well, I think the big one is that absolute divide between sales and marketing that came up. That's why I asked that question. I think we so commonly see, well, as an agency, we work with the marketing team. We very rarely get that contact with the sales team, which we always push back on, because we always talk about brand being about perception, and perception is typically created from the people on the front line having the conversations with the potential customers. So if the sales team aren't aligned around the brand messaging, the positioning, that sort of thing, then you're not going to get consistency in the perception that you're building, and you're not going to get the growth that you should get from your brand. And that's why I asked about the model that you kind of see as joined up, because the way I tend to articulate it, although it's probably deeper than this, is I see it as it's kind of marketing's job to generate the leads, and it's sales team's job to close them. Although there is some crossover in that seems to make a lot of sense to people. So that it's there's a quantifiable aim there in terms of generating leads, and the salespeople love it because you're just giving them a steady stream of pre-qualified people they can sell to. So that's how we get the connection going, and then it does become getting the sales team involved in the campaign planning and that side of things as well. But yeah, it's always a difficult process. I think the other challenge within that, though, is typically salespeople and marketing people are quite different.
Yeah.
The reason people go into marketing, typically, like I did, is you enjoy creativity. You like working with people and creating things, and salespeople are typically about the close, and quite aggressive and sort of, so there is always a bit of a contrast in personality there as well. But I guess if they have that shared goal, then it all makes sense when they start to see it working. But it does take a while to prove to salespeople how important marketing is.
Yeah, and it's interesting that they're different. I mean, they are different disciplines, and but then any great team has difference in it. I think part of the problem, it's typically, and it's hard for me to say because I come from a sales background, but I think part of the problem is there's been a lot of unprofessional salespeople that have come through that over the last probably 30, 40, 50 years. And actually really successful salespeople are very professional, and now it's becoming for me a non-negotiable to be highly professional again. And partly I think because a lot of salespeople come to sales almost from maybe not highly academic backgrounds as well. That's not the whole story, but there is an element of that as well. But I think that's been part of the distro. We've got all these kind of graduate kind of professional people and these kind of off the streets people, some of which are not very good. But I think that is changing. So that's interesting insight from your perspective. But I think you're going to see a shift in that in businesses that are going to succeed, and the ones that don't make that shift are going to really struggle. And I've always seen some businesses fall over. When you see 53% of salespeople hitting their quotas globally, that's a terrifying number. There's not another discipline in business where that would be acceptable, and it's clearly not sustainable either. So yeah, okay. Thanks, Neil. I just thought I'd just run that past you, and just a thank you from Sharon, and wanted to take up the offer of the sales theory material. Yeah, no problem, Sharon. I'll what I'll do on that is I'll just point you to the Sales Shift 2020 white paper, which is probably the place to start, which probably just starts to shape your thinking about the new world. We wrote that in 2013, and I think pretty much what we wrote in 2013 has come to fruition, backed up by a bunch of other research that's been done by people like CEB. So I think it's really good to read it now in 2020, because I think it now is very, very current. And then happy once you've read that, if you want to kind of continue sharing, having a conversation off the back of that, and anybody else that wants that, let me know. I think it looks like we're done now. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for your help putting this together. Because it looks really straightforward when I put it on a slide, but I know there's a huge amount of work in the background. So thank you to your team. Thank you for everyone that's joined us. I know lots of people are going to be listening to this on recording. So thank you to you once you do listen to it, and all have a great day. And hopefully, unlike me, some of you get some freedom next week.
Cool. Cheers, Jason.
Cheers.